Please listen carefully.
Hello, this is Listen Up with me, David Bellamy from Harkn, and today I am really excited to be joined by Howard Krais. Now, Howard is co-founder of a company called TrueComms. He's an employee engagement and communication expert with like a seasoned and long-standing history in both of those fields with some really big organizations, GSK, EY, Johnson Matthey, to name but a few, and served as president of the UK chapter of the International Association of Business Communicators. But none of those are the reasons I'm talking to him, right? So a brilliant background and experience. I came across Howard because he wrote a book that caught my eye, Leading the Listening Organization. And anybody who knows me or knows Harkn will know why that got our attention. So I reached out to Howard. We had an initial conversation that I think we both felt should have been recorded because that would have been a brilliant episode in itself, just as we explored the idea. But you also, anybody who follows us or follows my own social activity, we know we're big fans of this book, right? It's a terrific piece of work. So welcome, Howard Krais. Tell me a bit about yourself and what inspired the book.
Yeah, morning, David, and great to be here. As you say, it was a really good conversation. Let's hope we can replicate that now. So about me, as you said, I've spent most of my career in that sort of internal employee communications engagement arena. Most of that time in big companies. Started when it was very unfashionable, I guess, back in the 1990s at NatWest, and just sort of found somewhere where I felt at home and somewhere where, well, for me, what was important was how can you influence change? And that took me to various places and different jobs. And as you said, spent in more recent times, went to Ernst & Young, had a really great role there as the firm was globalizing all of its back office functions, which was the first of the professional services firms to do that. And I was leading the sort of change comms effort to support that. That was quite a big job. And then to GSK, where I supported the group chief exec, and then supported was the business partner to the HR team when the new CEO, Emma Walmsley, came in, and huge amounts of cultural change going on. And then went to Johnson Matthey, and I was, made a sort of conscious effort to to go back a bit in terms of starting up a new function in their biggest business unit, the clean air unit, and starting from scratch and had a brilliant time there. So lots of good in-house experiences, doing some really interesting things. But I think I'd always had this sort of itch which I wanted to scratch, which was to run my own business, like many others. You get sort of all that experience. And then with my partner, Anne-Marie Blake, we set up True just over a year ago. We're just into year 2 now. And then the book came about because really you mentioned IABC. So it was just about 6 years ago, almost exactly. And we were at a conference, it was actually taking place in Copenhagen. It was the European Region Conference for IABC. And 2-day event. And on the second day, they had this thing called Open Space. Some people might know Open Space. Is also, I think, these days known as Unconference, where there's no agenda. And so you sort of say, I want to talk about something, and then people can decide whether they join your table or someone else's. They can get up and go away if they're bored by what you're saying and all that type of thing. So I said, I want to talk about listening. And what was on my mind at that time was particularly from the perspective of the in-house communicator. And I was concerned that, so this is pre-pandemic. So I was concerned that, travel budgets were beginning to shrink, if not go away. And not that you could ever say, I'm going to go to Asia in a global role. I'm going to go to Asia just to do some focus groups and some listening. But, people were traveling less, I felt. Teams were getting thinner, and people were being expected to do more. And that more is often produce more and sort of push more down from a top down perspective. So if you're stuck at your desk, because those days you were pretty much 5 days a week in the office. So if you're stuck at your desk, and you were, just producing stuff, how do you know how your people are feeling in terms of how how the stuff that you're producing is actually going down. And B, hopefully comms people feel that they should be the voice of the audience. Well, how would you know that? I mean, how would you know outside of your head office? And if I think about GSK experience, the head office, GSK House, some people will know it as you come in from Heathrow into London, big building on the M4. How it has a huge sort of culture of its own. And when you get outside of that office, either to people who do very different roles or other parts of the organisation, it's totally different. But you wouldn't know that if you never got out of GSK House. You'd never have any idea of how other people are thinking. So this worried me. And so I wanted to start talking about listening in that context. So that was that. And then three of us got together, when we came back to London, we thought there was maybe something that was is there some work to do here that we could do? And we thought there was. And so we did a sort of a fairly small scale survey with just people in our networks. And that led to producing a first report. And actually what then characterized the work since then is every time we've done something, it's really been well received. And I think it's resonated with not just comms folks, HR folks, people who have some sort of stake in this thing around listening. And I think people feel we should be doing something. It makes sense that this should be part of what we're doing. And maybe there's a bit of guilty, well, we're not really doing it and we know we should be, or we're thinking about it, but we don't know which way to go. I think there's all of that, but it sort of makes sense to people. And so each time that we sort of did a report, the reaction was very strong, and that encouraged us to do some more. So we actually ended up doing 4 reports. The first one, say, a small scale survey. The second one, we then worked with the IABC to look at some best practice around listening, and how we found that was great, because IABC offers their sort of awards programs called Gold Quill is as good a description of excellence as I've ever seen in communications. The way they break down in all their different categories what excellence looks like. And I would certainly recommend anyone who's interested just to go and read what how you win a gold quill, what you have to show. So we went to IABC and we said, can you help us and maybe give us, what's the proxy for people who do this well? It's probably multiple gold quill winners, because they must be doing something very good on a regular basis. So we went and we got to meet some people, and many in the US actually, and on their stories sort of helped us create the second report. Then we did, again working with IBC, we did a major survey, proper survey with about 500 companies participating. And then the fourth report was on the back of that. One of the big findings, which we may come to, it was, and perhaps I was asked this the other day, what was one of your biggest surprises in this work, is that we went into the sort of research thinking that probably the most important listening relationship is with your line manager. We all know that you leave your manager, not your organization, that day-to-day relationship can make or break how you feel about, what you do. But actually what our research showed us was that, by some margin, the most important people in terms of listening in an organization were the senior leaders, for how they set the culture. We talked about climate rather than culture, but there's not really much difference. And so we then did a fourth report, which was some focus groups, really to understand the role of the leader and how that sort of played out in reality. And I think at the end of every report, we said, are we done now? We finished, that's it. It's been fun. Thanks very much. And then someone said, well, wait, why don't we do something on this? And then, after 4 reports, we said, well, I think we've done as much as we can do there. And then someone said, what about a book? And so that's what we did. And Routledge were very supportive and, allowed us to do that with sort of a lot of encouragement. And there you go. So long story, but it's been a really, great journey where people have supported us and felt that this is a topic that's worth doing and worth following.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I'm so glad you made it all the way to the end of that process, because the book is worth it. And and just say this at the beginning, we're going to obviously kick around some of the things that you talk about in this conversation, but one of the reasons that I talked offline about this, why is the book doing well? One of the reasons for that is it is absolutely the right thing to be talking about. And one of those the observations, I think, particularly as you're reaching outside of the communicator domain. I think one of my personal observations in my own career has been comms is probably 80% broadcast and 20% listen. If that, so that's the order of events, and I think what's really interesting, it is that's changing. I've been really interested, so the time that you and I came across each other, or I came across you, was a time when I started noticing more internal comms professionals adopting listening as part of the way they describe their activities, which is just an interesting move, right? So your timing is spot on. Now let's get into some of the meat of the work you've done, right? You've done a lot of work on the subject. You're obviously talking about it a lot right now. The listening organization. So it's the book leading the listening organization. What is the listening organization as you see it?
So I think, as you say, maybe it was 80-20 or whatever it is. And I don't know what the right number should be, but a listening organization to me is an organization that recognizes that they are, that your employees, and we would call employees the number one stakeholder. We're pretty clear about that in terms of our thinking. Maybe not surprising given the jobs we do. And I think of the three authors, it's worth saying as well that we all come to this from different sides of the same coin, if that's the right phrase, but maybe it isn't. But Kevin Ruck is an academic. He runs a training business. Mike Pounceford is a sort of career consultant, has his own business, has had for many years. And I was the in-house person. So for most of the time, we were all coming as people part of the comms industry, if you like, or profession, but from different perspectives. And I think that's really helped us to not take a sort of just a one sort of jaundiced sort of perspective. I think that's important. So I think then you say, so what is the listening organization? I think it's the recognition that, your people, I characterize it though actually as in this way to some extent. When you get a new job, you come, your first day at work, you go into the office or wherever you maybe don't go to the office these days, but you're full of excitement. You want to be part of a winning team. You want to play your part in winning. This is exciting, right? I mean, we're all excited when we get a new job, and so we should be. And it's going to be the best thing ever, and it's going to lead to the next best thing. But for that period, which might be the next 3 years or 30 years, that's a really exciting moment. And what historically I think organizations have been good at doing is squeezing out that excitement, unfortunately. But I think people are excited and have a lot to offer. And what I've seen, and I've seen this practically, is that people are full of ideas, concerns, questions, thoughts about how things can be better. And at the heart of it, when you think about why listen, it's because you'll perform better. And there's lots of, we have sort of 5, when I'm doing a presentation, I'll have there's 5 reasons to listen in a sense, but the number one reason is because performance will improve. And that feels like a pretty good reason to me, so, and you can look at that in many different ways and many different aspects. If I think about, the organization I was in at Johnson Matthey, manufacturing organization, operations, 17 factories. Many organizations like that operate by big, sort of overwhelming process dominated ways of doing things. But you don't get one process and this is the way we're going to do it forever. What you get is, continuous improvement, looking, marginal gains, all of this sort of thing. Now, you can't have that if you're not listening to the people who are doing the work, and about how we could do these things better. And that might be tiny little improvements from all over, but you don't get that unless you listen. When we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, or whichever way you sort of put those letters, I think one of the key things within DE&I is we want to make better decisions because we want to bring diverse voices and different voices to help us make better decisions. You can't do that unless you're prepared to listen to different voices. That won't happen. So again, listening is fundamentally part of decision making in that sense.
Yeah.
I think we would struggle to say that listening, that we can show a causal relationship between organizations who listen and perform better. But what you can do, and there is evidence, I think, that shows that where listening or employee voice, and they're sort of related, but we can talk about how they're different if you want. But where organizations have good voice, good listening, then engagement is going to be better. Again, it makes perfect sense that that's the case. If you feel listened to, you're probably more engaged than if you don't feel listened to.
Yeah.
And again, we can talk about the nuts and bolts of what all that means. But there's plenty of evidence that shows that companies with better engagement perform better. So, I think that there's a number of reasons. So so what's a listening organization? I think it's an organization that wants to perform better by, in a sense, harnessing the views and talents of its people.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. I mean, there's a load of stuff we could unpick in there, isn't there? I mean, I think it's interesting that I do want to talk. I'd like to get your perspectives on the difference between employee voice and employee listening. So I want to do that. I mean, but it is difficult. I mean, it's the same problem that we have talking with organizations. And it's interesting, isn't it? So can we categorically prove that listening improves performance? That might be tricky beyond the relationship with engagement. And we might accept that to be true, except nobody's defined engagement sufficiently that there is a single held view. So therefore, it's a notional concept, right? So we get into a cyclical conversation. But I think the point is that it is inevitably so that the people, I mean, this is the way we view this. Actually, take the listening part and just take the emotive bit out for a minute, because I think that's an important part too. But the people who are on the shop floor, in the body of the organization, working with your clients, your customers, your suppliers, your partners, your internal processes, know what's happening, what needs to be fixed, what's not going well, what's working, and all that sort of stuff, right? And part of the challenge, and that's where the continuous total quality movement and continuous improvement initiatives come from, don't they? They come from this idea, largely from Japan, of course, that we will integrate frontline feedback into a rapid, so sense-making, decision-making, action-taking loop where that's distributed around the organization and not just sort of fed to the top of the organization. So there's some interesting things to do there. But anyway, yeah, so all related to the same point. You're absolutely right. Now, let's just, before I move on, so there is a really big question about now. Why is this? And, again, we might talk about that. But before we do that, I do want to understand difference between voice and listening. Describe it for me.
I think the way we think about it is that employee voice puts the onus on the employee to have a voice to speak up, whereas listening changes that and puts the onus on the organisation to listen up. And I think that's subtle, but it's quite important, because it talks again about leaders and the organisation to recognise things like the power gap and psychological safety, and to create the environment for people to be able to speak up, rather than just put the onus on people to have a voice and it's your problem if you don't do it. So I think that's the difference. It's the difference. It's the shifts the responsibility over to the organisation.
Yeah, good. Like that. Makes a lot of sense to us. We in our own recent history of sort of vacillate between the terms, and actually the for the reason that so we have decided on we are an employee listening platform, largely for the same reason. But there are two parts to this, and I think there's work to be done on each side. So one part is, of course, we have to activate more voices. And so that we're going to talk about that in a bit more, so because I think that's, and that, by the way, is also incumbent, on the organization doing some stuff, right? So we have to, there's a whole load of implications for why people don't speak. And you've touched on a couple already today. The other side, of course, is that the strength of the listening muscles in the organization, and they vary wildly, even in companies, even in organizations that I would describe as listening organizations, companies that really want to to have employee voices baked into the way they work. There are pockets of resistance in there where people just don't. We come across leaders and managers who will put their fingers in their ears every day rather than actually listen to anybody else. I know what I
Yeah.
want to do, and I'm going to do that. And so anyway, but that they're all probably for deeper conversation. Let's talk about why now, right? Because I've probably got some strong views on this, but I wanted to. So why is the listening? Why is this? And you use an expression that we. If anybody wants to know why we changed our strapline to "This is the age of the listening organisation," by the way, it's chapter 1 of Howard's book. Right? You call it the listening age, right? So talk to me about that. Why is this the listening age?
I think there's, I mean, and I'm starting all of my sort of presentations like "Welcome to the Age of Listening." I think there's a number of reasons for that, and I think first of all, let's start with a non sort of business related reason. I think there's a general and part of there's one of my co-authors, Kevin Ruck, talks about we've captured the zeitgeist in a sense. It's his words, but I think there's something in that. I think that generally in the way our sort of public discourse is, our politics, and this isn't a political comment one way or another, but I think that a lot of people are feeling they don't have a voice at the moment. A lot of people are feeling they're not being listened to generally. So I think that there is a bit of a pent up need in a sense for people to feel I've got something to say, whether that's generally or in business or whatever. And then when you think about, take the Edelman Trust Barometer work, and that's very clear in terms of where is the sort of number one area for trust these days currently is within organizations. And so I think that feels relevant to this work in terms of, that it is a time that people want to be listened to and a feeling they don't have a voice. So that's sort of a more general comment, but I think there's a number of other reasons. So first of all, I think the pandemic played its part. So, we saw, as from an internal comms perspective, how organizations lent in a way they never had done. That, they were concerned about the well-being of people. Internal comms people suddenly were, really at the heart of the business in a way they never had been before. Then now there's some people who would say we've lost some of that, maybe. I take a view that it was 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but still a net gain, I think. And so I think there you saw, that was it's almost exactly 4 years since the UK lockdown, like today or tomorrow. I think it's the 4-year anniversary. So it's not that long ago since we were there. And I think that was a real example of organizations trying to listen in a way that they had never happened before. And then you say what's happened since then, some of the sort of work around mental well-being, for example, where people, are trying to listen in a better way to how people are feeling and dealing with situations. And there's more recognition of some of that sort of mental health challenge that, we've never really been able to crack in the past. I think it's still a long way to go on it, but it's, a much bigger debate than it ever used to be. So again, I think listening plays a big sort of role in that. I think if you look at the people coming into the workplace, the sort of Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen Z type age groups. Now, these are people who've grown up and they want to have a voice. They're used to having a voice, whether it's just through social media, whether it's through some of the sites that actually we all use, TripAdvisor or Glassdoor or whatever. People are going to organizations and they want to be able to say, if they've got ideas, if they've got questions, concerns, they want to be able to share them and they expect to be heard. In a way that maybe previous generations have stayed quiet and not, and kept those things to themselves. So I think that's one of the changes that we see. Technology plays another role here. You can do things with AI and some of the technology that's available for continuous listening, for sentiment analysis in a way that you could never do before. And I think many people, watching this, listening to this would recognize that situation when you do a big survey and that last question, that freehand question, give us one idea or give us one thing that's on your mind or whatever. And you as the sort of person left to analyze thousands of comments thinking, oh my God, how do I trawl through this for the next 3 weeks? But you can do that in 3 seconds now with technology. So the tools are increasingly there to do these things in a quicker and a better way. So I think there's all sorts of reasons. I think also, I mentioned earlier around growth of D&I and I think that increases sort of listening. So I just think there's a number of forces that are coming together all at one time, which mean people are thinking, there's something to this. And I think, as you said, David, you're seeing companies now have listening strategies,
Yep.
and you're seeing agencies having listening solutions. Now, in both cases, that might be largely survey based still, and you might be dressing up your survey under a new posh name. But I think that it's still sort of nods towards the fact that we recognise that we've got to do more in this field. So I think there are other things too, but I think that there's some of the things that are all happening, all coming together at the same time, and why we're calling this the listening age.
Yeah, brilliant. I agree with that. I think, there are things we're seeing. I can think of 3 really large organizations with new CEOs on board where listening is, and this is because they're new CEOs. This is, I suspect, is part of the process, but listening is my number one priority. Because they're having implications on us, right? Because those organizations are starting to, and that whole piece. I'm going to move on to talk about tooling, but I think the thing that's really interesting, certainly from Harkn's perspective, is all the things you've said are right. That there's, we looked into people's bedrooms. I remember when sort of 4 years ago this week, of course, as you said, we did that. But I got a call from one organisation said, "How quickly can we turn on Harkn? Our entire business is scattered, and we want to know how they're doing." Right? And that's our record, by the way. It was 3 days to get 1,000 people live on the platform. I wouldn't recommend doing that too often, but it was pretty. But that was the point. And I think what changed was, as you said, we looked into people's bedrooms and we discovered empathy became suddenly very important, didn't it? We all took on that sort of, "Oh, crikey, I had no idea that was what you were dealing with," and so there's frustrations and the eye rolls you might get in the office when you left to go pick up the kids, and when you see them behind you whilst you're trying to work, that sort of stuff. Everybody got a bit more sensitive towards what other people were going through. So I thought that was really helpful. But the other things, I think you're absolutely right. That the expectations of people coming into work now is, I don't want to. I want to go and work somewhere where I don't get to use my voice or I don't get to participate. Why do I have to wait 5 years till I get an opinion? You said something at the beginning when you were talking about, how organizations are good at squeezing that energy out of people. And it reminds me of a CEO of an organization I won't name, but probably 5 or 6 years ago, so pre-pandemic. So at the beginning of our journey, and he said to me, it's really interesting. He said, we hire primarily out of 6th formers join our organization. So we take them in at that level rather than graduates. And I said, it's really interesting. He said, it's a matter of weeks before I watch the lights start to go out in the eyes, and it's like that realization. And it's really sad to watch how quickly there's a realization of, oh my God, is this it? And and all that energy is lost, isn't it? So that's a thing that I think we're realizing needs to be addressed. We've got a lot to cover. I want to talk about,
you see that no, I was just going to say, you see it, don't you, on surveys when they start to do tenure based reports, and it's like the end of year 1 or the end of year 2 to year 5, there's a big drop off, a massive drop off, in many organizations at the end of that sort of first, second year. And then there's a sort of leveling up after about 5 or 6 years, maybe after 10 years, where you just accept it. You just say, okay, I'm just there, I'm just in a pattern now. But it is a sort of, it's a huge opportunity. And again, to the age of listening, you've seen the growth of employee experience, and that continues to grow. So employee experience, which is whether you're just, thinking about the moments that matter. I mean, this is, I'll wait and see how well this actually delivers. I think organizations are saying we have an opportunity, but also we have a huge risk here, and we can do a lot more if we really, again, employee experience is all about listening at those key moments, how people are feeling and how they're doing. And so that's another example of where listening is relatively new phenomenon through the life cycle of the employee.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think, I'm just because there is a point of distinction between us at this stage, I think, because I want to talk about tooling, but this is one of the points, right? So when we think about employee experience, one of the things I think is limiting our ability to think about listening in a more holistic way is the tooling, right? So actually what happens, and we encounter this every day, we are limited by our ability to understand what's available. And so therefore we think about employee experience, for example, as moments that matter. Well, I'm going to tell you a story that I told on a webinar last night, which is really interesting to me because this is the essence of listening. So in one of our clients, and this is very recent, right, there was a conversation that sort of exploded about there's no effing milk in the fridge, right? So this is it's on Harkn, so anonymous voice, but day-to-day life, no effing milk in the fridge. And I looked at that and I talked to one of my colleagues here and said, I sometimes wish people would talk about some bigger stuff. Right. And we got into a conversation, but then we had a little discussion about this on the internally, and then we were talking with the client about it. And the client saying, we're trying to get people to share their ideas, right? So where's the innovation? Where are the things that we can fix in this organization to help us go faster? And my colleague here, our head of engagement, Wendy, made a really interesting point. And this is the crux of it, right? We want people to show up to work every day, right? To serve our clients really well, to push this organization forward, to do a great job day to day. And we'd like them to lend a shoulder to innovation and creation of the new and expansion of the business. But we can't get you any milk in the morning to make yourself a cup of coffee. We're dragging you into the office, right? And we haven't got you the milk. And that for me, so that's an example, I think, of where when we start to reframe listening and say, we want to build trust, which builds all of the good stuff we need, and we need people to feel cared for and listened to. And listening for me is much more than it is the moments that matter. The point is that if somebody else is determining what those moments are, we're missing the point. Employees can tell us the moments that matter to them, right? And some days it's the milk, some days it's the fact that the kitchen's a steak, right? Some days, but those things are stopping the organization from moving forward. And do you know what? You want a culture of innovation, you want to move fast, you want to get better. As I said last night, don't forget the effing milk, right? That's the point. Anyway, tooling. That's my segue into the tooling conversation. Because you've obviously looked at this, right? And you wrote a couple of really interesting posts on LinkedIn this week about surveys. So just because that's all a tooling question, right? Talk to me about your sense of the world then.
How's surveys going?
Where's the listening? The listening tooling.
Yeah. Gosh, I was going to dive in around talking about milk there, but we'll pick that up later because I think that there is a leadership point, but I do want to pick up the leadership point. Let's talk about tooling first. So, look, I mean, in the book, we talk, I think I counted it. We've got a table in one of the chapters called How to Listen. And I think I counted 21 different things that we came across, and there'll be others, but there's 21 things that we've sort of analyzed and said, the different ways that you can listen. And in our research, no surprise, the number one way that companies say they listen is through the inverted commas, the big survey, the engagement survey, the annual survey, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's good.
That remains the number one thing. Now, I've got a lot of experience of running these things or being part of running these things in big organizations. And so I have a lot of frustrations around that. And I wrote a couple of, posts, and I've allowed myself, this is where I sort of say, maybe arrogantly or not, I don't know, to have a bit of a rant and to hopefully be a bit provocative around surveys. There's a huge industry to do surveys, and I'm certainly not ever setting myself up as a survey guru or a survey expert, because there are many people who know the survey industry better than I do. But what I've experienced in different organizations is a combination of my first article, which is the horrors of doing surveys, which includes things like and I won't get all of them, and I don't need to, but just, I'm sure again that listeners and what the viewers will sort of mentally tick off some of these. There's more focus on the response rate than there is on the results. The amount of time it takes in, leading up to a survey to get clean data is just ridiculous. Head office determine you've got to have every question under because there's so many things that are important to head office. And so people given these sort of 50, 60 questions, surveys to answer, most of those questions are either irrelevant or not going to lead to any action anyway, including questions like what's the question that always gets the lowest result? Do you think you get paid fairly, or do you think you get paid competitively, or whatever? To which people always say no, because what else are they going to say? And then what does the organisation do with that information? It could do something with it. It could then properly communicate about how salaries, with evidence, by the way, because I've never believed an HR function that says we benchmark our surveys locally. I've never seen that proved. So they always say it, and I'm sure that there's some survey that they have, report that they use, but I don't know how they would know that my salary and what I do is benchmarked. Anyway, that's another point. But I've never seen that question responded to ever. But it seems to appear in every survey. Maybe it's part of your engagement index from those sort of old-fashioned engagement index things. Or there's the question, one of my favourites is, which I saw, tell us how our senior leadership team are doing. And after a couple of years of asking that, they realised people didn't know who they meant. Did they mean my local senior leadership, my current, So they started to name them. They said the ExCo, tell us how the ExCo are doing. To my point earlier about the head office, I remember going in one company, going out and spending a day with someone in the sales team, and she had no idea who these people were. No idea at all. She sort of barely knew the chief executive, but the rest of them were, and it's, so why are you asking me questions that I just cannot answer? I have no idea about, but they're important to people in the head office. So the questions are irrelevant. You get, the results when they come take forever. One of the things about, if we haven't really said this, what's the definition of listening? For me, it's to respond appropriately. 2-word definition is responding appropriately. And that doesn't mean you do anything necessarily. Appropriate can mean many things. But one of the words is you respond. And how many organisations, you do the big survey and it's 3 months before people hear the results. By the time the survey companies come back and then done the sort of data cleansing, and then they get the headline report, and then the next report, and then the senior leadership want to cut it in 6 different ways. And by the time you then get, results which you can share more widely, it's taken literally 3 months. And it's like, well, that's relevant. Then people completely forgotten what they've done. Yeah. And then you get a score, and who knows what that score means? You get a score 64. It was up from 62 last time. And what's your ambition? Well, we'd like to get to 70 or 75 in 5 years' time. I've never seen an organisation that says, well, if we're going to have a score, because I know there's some people I know say, why have a score at all, which I sort of have some sympathy with, but I've never seen an organisation that says, well, we won't be happy till our engagement score is 95, because then we know that most of our people are really feeling engaged. Now, that would be quite exciting, because then you might start to say, what do we need to do in this organisation to really engage our people? Because anything less than 90%, it shouldn't be good enough, right? And if you're accepting that we're going to be at 70 or 75% in 5 years' time, you're sort of accepting mediocrity, I think. Then, I could go on, David. I mean, I don't believe that leaders really understand those scores. They look at those scores for maybe 1 or 2 months in the annual cycle, and then they sort of drop off again, when every month in a leadership meeting, they're looking at the financial scores, they're looking at the operational scores and metrics, because they're happening all the time. And then they look at the box that says engagement. Oh, well, that's not going to move till we do the survey in 8 months' time. So we'll just pass that one on. So again, it's just, just to me, all of this doesn't help the organisation. Let's park that now. I could go on, honestly. I love ranting.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. And I met the organisation with 95% engagement, right? Talking with the CEO, and so and this is right at the beginning of our journey, right? So this was a former client of mine back from my consulting days, and so I've gone with beta version 1 of Harkn, and we go and sit, and he said, well, we got a 95% engagement score, and I said, wow, that's amazing, and I said, does that depend on, I guess your score depends on what you've asked, right? And this is the point, right? So again, as I said earlier on, there's no definition of engagement that everybody agrees to. Every company uses a different measure, and that's okay. I'm all right with that. But the point is that I wrote years ago about the fact I couldn't find an organisation outside the top quartile that made the top quartile possible, right? So I couldn't work out how that was happening. But talking to this particular organisation, I said, tell me what it's like then with 95% engagement. If I'm in your shoes as the CEO, I'm imagining you have incredible flexibility, strategic flexibility, because if you decided with your organization you need to pivot tomorrow, right? Everybody's coming, right? Because they're all on board and they know what it's, they are with you. And he paused and he laughed and he said, no. He said, we move as slowly as everybody else. He said, I suspect our score, if we're honest with ourselves, is largely dictated because we operate in places where there are no other jobs. Most of our locations, we are the primary employer and therefore the only place that you're, right? So you start to pick away at what the point of this stuff is, right? And I just think that's interesting. So I'm just echoing the point back to you, that what's fascinating, what's fascinating to me is the way that, listen, I'm vocal about surveys as well, right? And you've heard me talk about, and I do want to say it just for record on this call, to my response to your point yesterday, actually, the symbolism is what's really important to me, where, leadership controls the questions, dictates the time frame and the pace at which things are happening, and then we give people questions and it goes back into the black hole and there's a delay and we then decide who controls, who sees what. But what we're doing there is we're creating a cycle that is breaking trust. It's not building trust, it's breaking trust, it's breaking engagement, because I can't remember what I said, why I said it. The context has now moved. Nobody's ever asked me whether there's milk in the fridge when I get to work. Nobody's ever asked me whether the kitchen is clean. Nobody has ever asked me what the grit in my shoe is today. And you've got no idea. And yet you want me to know, you want me to contribute to this stuff. And I think there's a whole bunch of stuff like that says actually just really reframing the way we look at the question. And the last thing I would say on the subject, which I'm hugely buoyed by, very personal, but also from an organizational perspective, I'm hearing that everywhere we go now. So that echoing sentiment of, senior leadership saying, we need more, we need it sooner, it needs to be more real and granular and all that stuff. And so, but anyway, that got me on my own soapbox.
So look, on the positive. No, good. And but there is a positive. Well, before the positive side, I think one of the things I've said a fair few times recently, and I think is going down well with people, is what's the definition of survey fatigue? Because a lot of people I've heard talk to me and say, in my organisation we've got survey fatigue, and what they mean and what they're trying to say is we can't do another survey because we're doing too many surveys. And I don't think that's what survey fatigue means at all. I think what survey fatigue means is we're fed up with doing surveys where nothing happens. And if you could prove to us that something actually happens, we'll do as many surveys as you want. And that encapsulates the problem with the survey in-house, the internal surveys, I think, today.
And that, by the way, that is it, right? And if you want, if you want, you probably don't use the rich language that I use, but that's the get the effing milk story, right? Isn't it? That's exactly that. So don't ask me the big question until you can solve the small question. So it's proved to me that the things are, that when the things we need to be addressed will be addressed, and then we can contribute in the broader sense. That I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that's exactly what's happening. So it isn't, and I think this is, when we talk about tooling, the other things that I find frustrating. And that's partly what caused me to respond to your message, to your post yesterday about here's what I would recommend. And I think you're right. I still think there's a place for surveys, and there's 2 or 3 ways I would use a survey in an organization, distinct from a more realistic sort of employee voice led version like we are. But the thing that the industry, I think, has done is it focused its attention on speeding up existing processes. rather than inventing something or innovating around the ideas that says, how do I get, what's the problem? The problem isn't the survey. The problem is actually what people need responding to and what we need to hear, if that makes sense. And so it's changing the nature of the dialogue. It's then bringing every voice to the table, and that's what should be happening. And I think, so my frustration has always been that we keep seeing more and more and more innovation in the industry that is just, well, that's that one done a bit faster than the one before, right? And that we're not tackling the root of the problem.
No, I agree. I mean, look, I'm not anti-survey. I want to be very clear. I'm not anti-survey at all. I think that there is definitely, and I do believe as well that the market is changing. There's new entrants to the market. I think the older sort of big survey organizations are having to change and adapt the sort of things that they've done in the past to respond to some of those challenges, like speed, like more, pulsability, going, more online, all this, on terms of mobile devices and so on. I think that you are seeing some of this change. My sort of list of, and there are more, list of complaints are just born of experience. And these are things that have all happened in different companies that I've worked in, and I'm sure still exist in many companies today. But if you take on the positive side, to me, a survey which has very few questions, but questions that all can lead to action. I think in my perfect world, I'd do a survey twice a year. I would say at whatever business unit makes sense, but at no fewer than 100 people, but potentially more, that you take one topic that comes from a survey and say, we're going to fix this. And you very visibly, because you communicate through the process, you pull some form of cross-functional team together within that business unit. And let's say the topic's decision making, maybe it's recognition, something like that, which the types of things that do come out of these surveys. And you say, right, we've got till the next survey in 6 months to fix this. And you're going to see this and we're going to show you that. I don't think that's impossible. I think that's very doable, because you're not saying, because what happens today, or in many cases, we sort of say, well, if you're a manager of 5 or more people, you get a report and you're expected to do something on the back of that report. So in huge organizations, how many managers have 5 or more people? And that goes up to the next level, the next level, the next level. It's like a pyramid of actions and just noise. And then it all dissipates anyway. But I think if the organization took a view of saying, we're going to fix one thing in the next 6 months, and then the next 6 months after that, we'll fix one more thing. I think that even if your thing personally isn't being fixed, you're actually visibly seeing these big topics being fixed because of people's voice and people's feedback. And then you'll say, I trust this process. It's actually leading to real change. And that's got to be a good thing. So I think that there's plenty more you can do. But surveys have a place for sure. Not the old fashioned way, which is still practiced in many places.
Yeah, listen, I think you've set the bar a bit low with your, let's fix one thing every 6 months, and largely because I think what we must do actually is, I think there's a better opportunity, which is actually to start thinking about how we enable people to solve some of these issues themselves, and I know that's because when you start to think back, rather than this, because this is the problem, right? You just get if it's either going all the way to the top and then getting dropped down, and so the problem is everybody's getting work done to them, whereas. If we can create, capacity is a challenging thing. Everybody's trying to do more with less. But if we, the subject of my webinar last night, by the way, was, moving fast, fixing things and building trust, which is sort of really riffing off the Facebook move fast and break stuff. If you're not moving fast, if you're not breaking stuff, you're not moving fast enough. And my point is that we're breaking people and we're breaking trust when we're trying to do that all the time, right? So how do you build trust and move at a speed where we are fixing the issues in our wake, right? And that has to be giving more empowered decision making on the ground of organizations, and there's a place for listening in that process. So how do we as an organization make sense together, collaborate, and use dialogue rather than surveys to explore stuff? Anyway, but that's the point. But I mean, I think we're violently agreeing in many ways that these are problems, and organizations.
Yeah, look, 2 comments on that, Darren. Yes, we are agreeing violently, but two comments. One is that that I think so. When I think about, we haven't really talked. I'm not going to talk too much about sort of change per se, but yeah, the role of listening in change is really important. And when I think about change and how I sort of try and do it and talk about it is, I think that people, we sort of touched on it earlier. Why doesn't change work? Because organisations just come up with these ideas. They say this is a very logical thing. You've got to change. They don't recognise that people are emotional beings. They need to actually work out what the change means. So they have a conversation about it. If you allow people to have the conversations, I think, the listening is inherent in that, so you can answer my questions. You can help me to understand. Understanding in change, I think, is the most important thing. So you use conversations, you have that conversation. I think you answer three questions, and the three questions are: what does it mean to me? The one we all know. What does it mean to us as a team? I think that's a really important one. So you have that collaboration going on, and you have proper conversations about this, and the ability to test it and interrogate the change. The third question, I think, plays to what you're just saying. It's once you've sort of understood and start to move forward, I think you then say, what can we do to start helping the change to be better? So this is the bit about taking on responsibility yourself. Now, I don't think that happens overnight. You have to go through those two stages first. That, people might say, oh, it's going to take a lot of time. Well, it'll get you to where you need to get to quicker, I would argue.
Yeah.
But you get that sort of taking individual responsibility. The second point I want to make is, people sometimes think listening means leaders. I had a conversation with someone recently, and they said they were talking to a leader, and the leader didn't want to ask a question because the leader said, I don't want to open a can of worms, which is like, well, really? Wouldn't you want to know what people are thinking? But the point here is that when a leader talks to employees, when I talked about responding appropriately, it's not about I'm going to listen to what's all your problems, the milk in the fridge, and I'm going to solve them. A good leader can sit in a room with 20 people, for example, and all those 20 people can have their questions and their concerns and their challenges, and the leader walks out the room with those 20 people thinking they've all been listened to. The leader doesn't have a single action, but has helped understanding, has pushed back, has said to the people, why haven't you raised that with the local facilities people? If there's no milk in the fridge, why are you telling me? Why haven't you done something about it with the facilities people? Oh yeah, I suppose I could do. You hear that so many times. People think the milk in the fridge is for the organisation to solve, but maybe there's just been a facilities breakdown, or someone's just not done something on one day, or whatever it is. But the individual can solve that and doesn't have to raise it. So I think I agree. A good leader will push back sometimes and say, it's not for me to solve. You can solve a lot of this yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, indeed. Well, that's leadership. Because I've got two or three things that I want to just quickly cover if we can. Right. So we haven't touched upon leadership, and I want to, because of course the book is called "Leading the Listening Organization." Right. So listening implications then. So, there were some really interesting things in the book, and I particularly liked, you expressed something that I was doing in a very clumsy way, by the way. So the idea of, what does listening mean? And I would talk, the active listening is not cocking your head to one side and think, I worked for somebody once who'd do that when you were talking to them. He would cock his head to one side, and it was like, so now I know you're not really listening. This is your listening face, right? And it's that sort of thing. But you talk about that role. So tell me more about the implications for the leadership.
Yeah, and let's start with the challenge here, which is that this isn't a natural skill for people, for necessarily. I've worked with some brilliant leaders who do get this naturally, get the importance and the ability to listen, but it's not trained, which is a concern. And in the book, a lady called Elizabeth Williams, who's a Canadian academic, did some work for us, and she looked at 18 different business schools, some of the best business schools in the world, at their MBA program. So what are future aspiring leaders being taught? And she wanted to see how many times does listening feature in one of their courses. The answer was once in 18 schools, and that was a customer listening module. So the point being, where leaders are, no surprise, is it? But where leaders are being taught about communications, they're taught about one to many, how to speak, how to get your point across. They're not taught to listen. They're not taught to be curious. They're not taught to, recognize they don't know everything. And there is quite an old fashioned hero leader. We call it the parental trap, sort of model where leaders feel they have to have all the answers, and it's some form of weakness if they don't. And we'd argue that's not the case at all, that strength comes from recognizing you don't know all the answers, and that there are people who are across the organization, many people who can help you make better decisions. So listening here means being curious, being interested in the contributions that others can make to help you make the best decision. One of the things listening is not, and I think it's important to stress, is it's not about, we're not advocating for some sort of kumbaya democracy, we'll come together to make a decision. No, leaders make decisions. Leaders have to lead. I absolutely believe that. But I think that they lead in a better way if they listen not to the same two people all the time, but they listen to different people, different experts across the organization to help them make better decisions. I think that at the heart of this, that's what, again, listening means better performance. One of the ways it does that is by allowing leaders to make better decisions.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, we have a long conversation about where decision making occurs, but that's a different day. I think that, but I think in there as well, you the Ted Lasso thing. Be curious, not judgmental. Right? Have you ever seen Ted Lasso? But it's like a whole comedy show of leadership lessons. But anyway, no, I agree with all of that. I think you're absolutely right. The other thing I think that you did really well in the book, and I really liked this, was the obvious trap that people allow themselves to fall into. And some of this, again, is the approach they take rather than the intention, if that makes sense. So they allow themselves to fall into this trap, which is the idea that if we open ourselves up to listen to everybody, the expectation is that we do everything that they say. And I know you just touched on that. I think there are levels of this. I personally think that the organisation should take care to make sure there is milk in the fridge if you're mandating everybody gets in the office, for example, right? So they're just basic things that we should do for people. But many companies will be worried about listening for fear that it sets the idea that we must act on it. And I can't tell you that the organizations that have a problem with that. And I thought you tackled it really well in the sense that actually what it's about is accepting that we're going to take the voices in to the dialogue, right? So that's what people want. Right? I want you to listen to my opinion. We say countless times to people that not everything people say needs a change program, right? Just what it needs is acknowledgement. I've heard you, right? And you don't even need to be the one that does that. Anybody can do that, right? People need to say that this is not working for me right now. Do you want to talk about it? Not really. I just want to get off my chest, right? Do we want to do a project about it? No, I don't want to come and talk about it in any more detail. I just want to let you know this is getting on my nerves. And when that happens enough, it'll reach the top of the list and somebody will tackle it. But that's sometimes enough as long as we listen, right? And so I thought you conveyed that in a really good way in the book. And that for me is really the essence of the shift. I am staggered. I am staggered. And I think it's staggering that, the MBA programs don't have anything on listening at all. Ironically, it is a fairly crucial skill, innate skill, actually. And I know we teach ourselves to listen, but actually as a communication capability, we have two ears and one mouth. We're genetically wired that way, all that sort of stuff that, wired is the wrong expression, but you know what I mean. Do you think there should be more emphasis on the inherent part of the individual, or should we be doing more training?
I think part of it is, there's a slide I use again with two children talking to each other. In a sense, you learn to listen from your earliest days. That's something we do in our social intercourse and just, as kids, and we listen and we know as well when we're being listened to and when someone's not listening to us. We know that from a very early age. But I think that's part of, because it's sort of seen as a natural human behavior in some organizations, it's almost like it's just assumed rather than thought about.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing. I think I think that it depends on your definition of what a leader should be, what a leader should be. Now, I would like to think that when I talk about the age of listening and a listening leader, that things are moving in this direction, that people are going to say, we need to, there is value in this. Our leaders need to be able to listen. Whether it's the comms professional or someone in HR or wherever, you've got a great opportunity to build your reputation, your relationship, by being able to show that you can be the voice of the audience, I think, and that is really helpful. And leaders do listen to that. When you say that won't work, how do you know? Because, and that will work because we've done it this way, and this is what people tell us. I think people do listen to that, and you've got evidence you show that. But then when you can then take advantage of that and help a leader's personal skills in this area and capabilities in this area, you're well positioned to do that. And I think that again helps you as, in terms of your partnering and advisory sort of role. So I think that's helpful. So yeah, I think it's not natural because some leaders, we talked about psychological safety in the book from two perspectives. The obvious perspective, we all know we do that town hall, that big meeting, and then we say any questions, and then it's like tumbleweed and people are sort of waiting and the audience is thinking, oh, I don't know, shall I ask that difficult question? There is a fear in many organizations if I ask a difficult question that somewhere, someone is going to make a note of mine and it's going to be a mark against my name in some way. And particularly in organizations going through redundancies and change, you don't want to put your head above the parapet necessarily where, because inherently trust is broken down. I think we're familiar with that in terms of psychological safety. Slightly less expected in our research was that leaders also suffering from psychological safety issues. What happens if I don't know the answer to a question? What happens if I'm asked a question and maybe I might sympathize with the question, but I've been told I've got to give this message, from the organization. I don't want to look weak. I don't want to look as if I don't know. But I would say showing some vulnerability is fine. Saying you don't know and I'll find out the answer is okay. But that's part of what our research showed us. So if leaders can recognize if we are able to move to this sort of different model where leaders don't have to have all the answers, don't feel that they need to be able to solve every challenge immediately. I think that's much more healthy. So, if there's some training required to get us there, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, brilliant. I agree with that. I think the psychological safety thing, again, is something we write about, talk about a lot. There's no question for me that, it's people are doing the right sorts of things and should be trying to aspire to creating environments where people can speak up. It's just way too nuanced and way too complex at sort of deep social level. The obvious thing, I always think about this, one of our clients, chief people officer, said to me once, when we do the town halls, if we make the questions anonymous, loads of people ask questions, and if we make them put the names to them, hardly anybody says anything. I think we have a psychological safety problem. I said, yeah, you might do, but it doesn't necessarily make it an unhealthy one. I said, the thing you've got to accept is that when you've got 5 executives standing up on a stage presenting numbers and charts and images, right, we all zone out for a minute, right? And then you think, has he already said that? The question I want to ask, I'm scared that somebody's already said it, right? So it's not just asking the difficult questions. We always put ourselves in. I'd like people to be able to challenge the model, of course, but we're afraid of looking stupid as much as we are being risky. I think it's the same thing for leadership, right? So that whole thing is, it's the vulnerability line can quickly trip into incompetence or, fallibility. And so it's really nuanced. And this is the segue for the bit of the conversation I was revving into, because it was the bit of the book that we touched on last. Let's talk anonymity, right? So I'll let you describe how you approached anonymity in the book and the conclusions you drew, because I think this is the bit we've got to talk about.
Yeah, we had quite a long, between the three of us, we talked quite a lot about this and what our sort of view of this was. And I guess where we wanted or where we thought we'd get to is a sort of a clear view of what it should, anonymous is good or not good, confidentiality as well. But where we really, in the end, I guess we sat on the fence. we sort of, I don't know, maybe we took the fifth. Because actually it just depends on the culture of the it depends on the culture of the organization. So just exactly as you say, you know, I've been in situations where leaders are very frustrated by this. And in some situations where they go further and they say, completely showing a lack of understanding of how these things work, we want a culture where people don't feel they have to be anonymous. Therefore, we're not allowing any anonymity. Guess what, guys? You didn't get many questions, or people didn't feel that they would speak up. And it's sort of, you know, oh, well, if we keep doing it this way, they will in the end. You know, that sort of, we'll force them there to take an approach, which I don't think is a good one. Anonymity is right in certain situations. You know, I've done a lot of these things, and, you know, I thought quite a lot around how it works with the questions that get asked at these things, you know, whether not having many questions is a good thing or a bad thing, or whether the questions weren't the questions you were hoping for is a good thing or a bad thing. And, you know, it's difficult to be too sure. We'll all have our own views. There's also a cultural lens to this, as others have reminded me. You know, in some countries that there is just a greater desire for anonymity or greater fear if I put my name out there. Maybe, you know, I don't want to ask someone who's more senior a difficult question because that's just not how it's done here in some cultures. I think you've got to be respectful of that. But I think it's about, yeah, ultimately, it takes time to build trust in an organization. And if anonymity suits where you are and allows people to be part of the conversation, then you should embrace it, and you should be prepared to have difficult questions, even questions that you'd rather not have, and show that you're prepared to answer them, even if they're not the questions that you would choose to have. And I think then you know, over time, and not just through this, but you build trust, and you'll get to a position where you can start to say, okay, we think we've come a long way. Let's try and have this conversation without the need for anonymity. But I think that, you know, it's not just about the questions you have in a meeting. Trust comes from all aspects of the organization. You know, if you go through a particularly tough redundancy program, don't think that people are going to jump to trust you, you know, if it's 6 months on from the previous redundancy program. So I think there's lots of factors here in terms of how people feel about organizations. Anonymity has its place for sure. But we should all be working to build really strong trust in an organization where you don't need it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that's, so we are more in agreement than we're not. I mean, so the way we see this, so here's my take, right? And here's the way I think organizations should start seeing anonymity. So think less of it as a question of culture and think more of it as a question of inclusion, right? So in the same way that we can have the conversation about, you know, our culture means we want to be in the office or we don't want to be in the office. As soon as you go all in the office again, then you're becoming a less inclusive workplace because we drive some people out, right? Anonymity as part of, again, if we come away from surveys and town halls and say, okay, how do we need to listen to people? Then we need, and see, this is Harkn's very strong view on this, right? So we are an exclusively anonymous platform. So everything on Harkn is completely anonymous and it's done consciously. So it is not to replace town halls. It is not to replace conversations on Teams or Yammer or Slack. It's not to replace interaction one-to-one and meeting rooms. But it is to say, look, we need to embrace as many voices as possible. And if we want that to happen, then we need to level the playing field. And then we can equalize voice by removing any sense of status, power dynamic, any bias. And they still exist, right? You can ask any. I mean, we talked about this, didn't we, with Marie, we know there are questions for women to, you know, that still their voices don't carry as loudly or as well in the room, and then we get into questions of ethnicity and other minority groups in the workplace don't get their voices heard as well, and so suddenly, you know, for me, it echoes back to an Indian organization that we work with, where their challenge was, can you get people to speak in our company, right? And about a month in, a lady in that company wrote to us and said, what I love about Harkn is it's finally about what's being said, not who said it. And so when you think, so again,
Yeah.
so the way that we look at this and I just want to go further again, if I may, for just a second, to say, well, even those people, because I have been, I'm as white and middle-aged and middle class as you can get, right? So I have not faced many barriers, and therefore have never had an issue raising my voice in a meeting. And anybody who's ever worked with me knows that I do it too much. But the reality is that isn't the case for everybody. And what people like me need to also accept is that just because I'm prepared to have a conversation in public and I can voice my ideas, I don't need a lot of reflective time, to bring stuff to the table. Actually, when you start to layer in neurodiversity and everything else, maybe it's incumbent upon me to say, actually, for me to get the best out of the rest of this business, we need to embrace anonymity and asynchronicity so that we can allow people to engage with our dialogue. And again, it's dialogue, not surveys, all that sort of stuff. And then you say, well, then we have surveys that anonymous, non-anonymous, we can have Teams chats, and I think it's just to emphasize the point here that, this is how we describe to clients, you broadcast things through variety of channels, but if you broadcast one of those communication channels into something like Harkn, then what happens is you say, we have countless ways to speak to our people. And as one of our clients said to us, we have one place where they can speak safely back to us. And that's the point, right? So I think when we start to say, well, that's where anonymity, I think, can really help enrich dialogue. And it's trying to break down, because it isn't at all saying that anything else you said was wrong, if that makes sense. It's just, I think when we land on this, anonymous or not, we have to acknowledge anonymity for what it really is, which is a question of bringing more voices to the table and equalizing stakes. That's the key. Anyway, so probably made my point quite loudly there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm in agreement.
Now, final thing then, because I think, we've taken up a bit of your time. I've really enjoyed today's conversation. It's every bit as good as I thought it was going to be. The future for the listening organization. Where is all of this heading?
Well, I think that's the $64 million question, isn't it? Yeah, if we believe it is the age of listening, and I'd like to think it is, then organizations are beginning to recognize, whether it's through employee experience or because of the demands of, people coming to the workplace or whatever, as things I said before, if it's appreciation of that, if we do this right, we can perform better or we can make better decisions, then I think that people are going to say, are we truly listening? Are we listening? And how do we improve that? I mean, we're finding, people are beginning to say, we're conscious. We do the survey. We've got online tools. We've got our employee resource group. So we are getting, different voices and listen and how do we bring all of this together? So I think that's a really interesting thing, which I think companies are beginning to wrestle with a bit and say, we probably do more listening than we realise. And actually, if we can bring this together in a powerful way, that can really make a difference with leadership, because we're really showing, what people are thinking. So I think that's encouraging. And I think that we keep doing more and more. I think we keep going and saying, are we getting the right voices? Are we getting enough voices? And how do we show to leadership, that these voices can help us make better decisions? One of the things that I'm doing personally at the moment is we're with one of the other co-authors, we're working on I guess you call it a product, or something, in the book there is a listening audit sort of sketched out, but we are doing something slightly different or further than that to actually triangulate the relationship. Leaders probably think listening works in a certain way. The comms or HR folks probably think it works in a certain way. And employees will have their own take on whether they feel listened to or not. And it'll be really interesting. And I think sometimes, when you put this in front of leaders and you say, how do you think it is? Well, this is what your employees are saying. That can be a bit of a penny dropping moment. And then people start to say, actually we need to do something about that. And so we'd like to, we think there's a real, that could be a really helpful service for companies, because I think, to actually start say, what is our listening strategy? And how do we sort of make this as part of our engagement work as broadcast, or as some of the other things that we do? That's what I'd like to see, that the companies are actually saying this is as important as the broadcast stuff, or as some of the HR stuff, or because it's just fundamentally part of the employee experience, which I say with a small e and a small e, rather than as part of the function.
I agree. Yeah, and I got that as well. I think that is spot on. I think there's the listening strategy piece, the listening and response whole bit is I think that's where there's going to be emerging work. And it's when we set out, Howard, it was, we spent a long time trying to activate voices, and then you realize that actually the muscles on the listening side need work as well. It is not a question of if we get better quality information into the channel, then is it all going to work? And of course, it's not just that. There's much more to it. So I think that in the round, as you say, it's knitting together these various tools and say, okay, well, what's left? And we've done some of that work already, and it's kind of largely why we think there's a really sort of a neat fit for what we're doing. But I suspect the work you're about to do will be really additive. So let's wrap up there. I do want to sort of give we'll do this in the sort of show notes and the comments below. But where can people find your book?
Well, I think phases, all good booksellers. Yeah, I mean, it's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It is available online. But Routledge are the publishers, and you go to the Routledge site and you just put in leading the listening organisation. It will take you there. I know that was 22nd of March today as we're recording. We have a discount code which will go to the end of March, so we'll get that updated. But currently, at least for the next 9 days, you can get 20% off with the discount code LTLO, Leading Listening Organisation 20. That will work for you. And at least for the next 9 days, as I say, these things are not cheap, it's fair to say. But so you can get it in a number of places. Ultimately, David, get in touch with me, through LinkedIn or wherever, and I can direct you. It's selling well at the moment, and we're delighted with every sale.
Yeah, good. And we'll make sure that code gets in, and if we'll try and get this episode out in the next few days, and so that at least people have a week to do it. But otherwise, perhaps if we can update that as it goes forward. I'll also put connections to True Comms or to True, and to your LinkedIn profile if you're happy with that in the show notes, and then people can reach out. Obviously plenty to talk about on the subject. I've loved having you on this conversation today. I think your work is terrific. The book is awesome. Thank you, Howard.
Well, I appreciate it, and lovely support, and it's been great, David. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Terrific. All right.
Please listen carefully.